remember at that stage discovering the game Monopoly. Absolutely mesmerised by that game, and didn't understand anything about property investment, or didn't understand, the whole concept of property portfolio, but I just loved that game and the idea of buying multiple properties and working your way up to, building hotels on your sites. It was just amazing. And, and that's sort of what I'm doing in real life now.
This is Property Investory, where we talk to successful property investors to find out more about their stories, mindset and strategies. I'm Danny Ciarma, and in this episode on Property Investory, we're chatting to passionate property developer Danny Ciarma, founder of Urban DC. We'll follow his journey from architect to property developer, how his foray into property investment involved taking his future wife on dates to auctions and open inspections, and how his interest in property stemmed from playing Monopoly as a child. Having done so much with his time, Ciarma shares what he has done to become successful.
I'm a director of Urban DC, which is a property development company that I formed about 5 years ago. So I've been developing medium to high density residential buildings for around 20 years now. Started out as a registered architect, but pretty quickly moved into project management and development management, and then became a developer very early in my career. So in the last 15 years, I've completed over 20 development projects, and currently with Urban DC, I've got two projects under construction. One in 308 Carlisle Street, Balaclava, which is 38 apartments over retail. I've got one under construction in Rozelle in Sydney, which is 22 high-end apartments. And I'm about to market a project I've got in Caulfield, which consists of 18 large owner-occupier apartments. And I've got further two projects in planning at the moment in Sydney. One's in Rose Bay and the other's in Bondi Junction. And just completed a building in Brighton, which is 26 high-end owner-occupier apartments called Oscar Brighton. And only a couple of weeks ago, that building won the Bayside Council Design Excellence Awards for medium density housing. So that's a nice accolade to have.
Entering into property development was a natural progression for him after architecture, when he discovered the later wasn't for him.
It was just, it was one of those things where, I've always wanted to be an architect, and by the time I actually became one, I just felt it wasn't satisfying the overall experience of what I wanted out of property. I found myself just constantly at a desk, documenting and drawing. I was really attracted to the other side of property, which was, creating it, developing it, sourcing sites, sourcing buildings, apartments that I could renovate, and that just one thing led to another, and I just got into, I wanted to be more hands-on in the project management side initially, and then that just grew into doing, my own projects.
So what does he do in any given day?
I've got, as you've heard, I've got several projects on the go, so I'm constantly rotating from one project to the other, and depending on the phase a particular project is in, that will determine how much I spend on one project. I might spend 3/4 of a day focusing on one element of a project, and then 10 minutes on another one, and so forth. So it's just whatever's required. So, I might be going to a planning meeting, talking about all the issues surrounding about that for our submission. Then I might move on to a marketing meeting to talk about the brand mark for the project and marketing material. Might go to a site meeting and talk to the builder about how the progress is going on site, visit sites whilst I'm doing my due diligence. And there's a lot of desk work too, undertaking feasibility studies, talking to valuers, talking to bankers, right through to marking up plans with a red pen, which I often do, send it back to the architect, and the list goes on. So, yeah, it's just, rotating rotating through all those elements that's required in order to keep the projects going.
Wow, it's non-stop, and it sounds like you do have to rely on a team very heavily because you just can't do all this yourself, can you?
Yeah, no, I've got a team that assists. I outsource a lot of it, so I'm sort of like the conductor, sort of controlling it all. And I've got a team of people out there, which team of architects, team of engineers, and they're all, and in many cases they're different teams on different projects. So Roselle, for instance, I've got a totally different set of consultants that I would have on my Melbourne projects.
Growing up in a country era, Ciarma's first attraction to property was influenced by his father and the board game Monopoly.
So I grew up in Kilmore, country Victoria. My dad was trained horses and harness racing. So I grew up on the farm with lots of animals and horses, and I spent most of my childhood either sitting on a sulky behind a horse or at the races. I went to a school in the country, but from an early age, I always wanted to be an architect. So, I from as early as I could remember, I loved drawing and sort of loved property. My dad, prior to training horses, was a builder developer. So he built spec homes and apartment buildings, and from an early age, I was always on building sites, and can still remember the smell of sawn timber, when the framing material was going up. And I remember, playing around in the garage and, at the age of 8 and looking at all the architectural plans, all the documentation that Dad had for all these building projects, and I was just mesmerised by it. And that was back in the days when it was all hand-drawn. And I just knew then I want to do this. I want to be an architect. I always had a flair for it and always knew what I wanted to do, and which was good for me because it gave me a lot of focus whilst I was at school, had something to work towards. And in terms of property itself, even I remember at that stage discovering the game Monopoly, I was absolutely mesmerised by that game and didn't understand anything about property investment or didn't understand, the whole concept of property portfolio, but I just loved that game and the idea of buying multiple properties and working your way up to, building hotels on your sites. It was just amazing. And, and that's sort of what I'm doing in real life now.
While at university, he undertook several hospitality jobs prior to pursuing architecture as a career.
Oh, no, I went straight to uni. It was a 5-year course, so it's a long course. And I did the last year over 2 years because I wanted to work. I just couldn't wait to get out there. So I worked in an architectural practice whilst I was studying part-time for the last 2 years. So, no, straight into it. No, I did the odd job whilst I was going through uni to help put myself through. I did everything from, kitchen hand, chef, cook at KFC. I was a waiter, a barman. I steam cleaned cups. I did all of that. But, professionally, I went straight into architecture.
Great. And how long were you in architecture before you jumped into doing project management?
I was in it for about 2 to 3 years. You have to do a 2-year period to fill out a logbook and become registered. I wanted to become registered. I'd come so far, I wanted to be able to say I can call myself an architect. So I did that, and probably after about 3 years, I got into project management at Village Roadshow, and that was a great experience because you got to you see so many different facets of the building process. Not only did we manage the fit-out contractor, we also managed the relationship with the landlord, because it was always in, like shopping centres. So there was a lot of lessor-lessee type relationships that had to be managed. And then over and above that, we had our own contractors, our FF&E or fit-out contractors, the carpet, the curtains, the seating, projections. So there was a whole heap of things that had to be managed. So you really, really, it was a great training ground to sharpen your skills in project management.
Wow, okay. And how long were you there for?
Testing my memory now, but probably 5 or 6 years. Yeah, it was 5 or 6 years. I got sent over to Geneva to develop the first multiplex in Switzerland for Village Roadshow. So I did that. And then when I got back, I knew I wanted to move into development. And that's when I got a job for Docklands Authority as development director, which was a really good springboard into the development industry.
Educating himself in property development rather than jumping straight into it was part of what contributed to his success. He also recommends that aspiring developers attain hands-on experience as well.
It's a funny thing, a lot of people jump into property development. I know, would you jump into a surgery, and operate on someone if you didn't train as a doctor? You know what I mean? So it's people seem to think that anyone can do it, but it takes a lot of time and years of experience to get it right. Back in my day, there was never really a property development course at uni. I think now there may be. There was always project management courses, and they were even sort of quite new, even back then. I'm talking, 20, 25 years ago. People come into the industry from many different avenues. There's architects that become developers, there's quantity surveyors, there's builders, there's all types of people that enter the field, and everyone has their own journey and experience. The probably easiest thing to do is get a job with a developer and learn project management skills, start off as a junior sort of assistant project manager and work your way up to development manager. That's what I would recommend. Even when I was doing architecture or working as a young project manager at Village Roadshow, I was always buying apartments and houses and renovating them, and I always did that on the side. So you sharpen your skills bit by bit, sort of outside of the workforce as well.
Coming up after the break, we'll delve into Ciarma's property investing and development journey, about where he started.
I was in partnership in a company called Urban Inc. So we had that for about 7 or 8 years, and that was in my own right with another partner.
How the great Australian dream of owning your own home has evolved.
It just becomes more commonplace. It just becomes a common thing that, I'll sell my house and I'll move into an apartment. So I think that market's going to get stronger.
And that's next. I'm Danny Ciarma, and you're listening to Property Investory. Hey podcast listeners, are you enjoying listening to these stories and want more? Then head over to propertyinvestory.com and subscribe to receive your free property case studies that I only send exclusively via email. Just one of the many benefits of being part of this community. These real case studies are from experienced property investors where they share specific numbers of their portfolio, the strategies, and much more. Simply visit propertyinvestory.com to get your free case studies. Now back to the show. Beginning his property development journey, Ciarma worked for various companies before entering into partnerships with them.
We did lots of projects there as well. And prior to that, what really gave me sort of the head start was I entered into a partnership with a well-known developer at the time called Maurice Schwartz, who invited me in as a partner in a company called Pan Urban. And that was probably around about 20 years ago, actually. And I was managing director of Pan Urban and took a partner there. And that was, a really good entree into property development, because I had an older mentor that sort of, taught me the ropes and or helped me sharpen my skills. And I moved on from there. So I have been, doing it for about 20 years, but in different phases with partnerships with people.
So what's been the difference in doing it with partnerships compared to, say, running your own property development company?
Oh, you don't have to check with your partner if, decisions you're making. Are you happy with that? Yeah, and each partner are equal. You're always checking with each other, and you're pretty much always on the same page. But you run your own race. You run your own race. Sometimes you need partners, because sometimes if you may not have the overall rounded experience, you might be stronger in one aspect of development and your partner might be better in another. There's lots of people that come together where someone might have great financing skills, knows how to, arrange capital or raise capital, and then he might get into partnership with someone that understands construction, and has a building background, and those two sort of complement each other. So it just depends on your own. I tend to have a well-rounded balance, of experience amongst all facets of the industry. So I'm okay to go it alone. 1 minute you've got your design hat on, marking up plans. The next minute you're looking at a feasibility, trying to work out a cash flow and the internal rate of return. And then the next minute you're talking to the lawyer about an agreement. Next minute you're talking to a builder about, construction techniques and types of materials. So you need to know, a little bit about everything.
Danny's target market is towards the luxury downsizer market, which was different to the Urban Inc. market.
Prior to that, we targeted, in Urban Inc., we targeted the investment market. And that was probably a function of the timing of that market. The investment market was very strong. And the Urban Inc. model was to develop smaller sort of investment-driven apartments that were delivered to the market at an affordable price point, but dressed up to look really good. Design was always important to us, so our buildings always looked spectacular, and they were always built well. And that was our market, and we used to sell through investment groups, and some were offshore sales as well.
So when Ciarma started Urban DC, his focus was on smaller boutique buildings.
I really focused on doing smaller boutique buildings that were targeted towards the owner-occupiers, and better, more higher-end buildings. And that's what every building that I've done so far within Urban DC is within that sort of those parameters. So I just get more pleasure out of designing a large 3-bedroom or a large 2-bedroom apartment that has really nice, spacious rooms, better finishes, just better environments for people to live in, rather than targeting the smaller apartments for the young students. So that's the Urban DC model. That's owner-occupier product on infill sites in established suburbs.
And is that because the market now is changing towards that? Because I've been speaking to a few developers recently, and they're saying that with the baby boomer population starting to move on to retirement, they're obviously still owner-occupiers and want something a bit different in the market. Is that what's driven that?
There's no doubt that that market segment is stronger, and there's no doubt that the investment market has become weaker, and it's not as strong as it used to be. So that's one driver. But look, I think that market's always been there. I think, when I was with Pan Urban, we developed 401 St Kilda Road, which was very, very high end, and it was one of the first wave of owner-occupier buildings. And at the time, there were several being built. It was around about 2007, and that was the first wave. The very first was the Melburnian, which was a cycle, a property cycle before that. But in 2007, there was Lucient, 1 Clarendon Street, 401 St Kilda Road. There were a few projects that were targeting those owner-occupiers. And I think that was probably the first time the baby boomers really started to sort of start that journey of downsizing.
It's clear that times are changing, with the great Australian dream of owning your own home evolving into low-maintenance, minimalistic apartment living.
Since then, I think it's always been there. And I just think what's happened is the population growth and, immigrants coming in and Asian students and just population growth in general has created a demand for investment-driven stock. So, a lot of the developers focused on that. But even during that period of time, I still think there was a demand for owner-occupier stock, and I think that's going to continue. I think that's an upward trend, particularly as the younger generations come through. I think the baby boomers are the first cab off the rank that sort of experienced this, this apartment living. I think the likes of you and me and generations even before us, it just becomes more commonplace. It just becomes a common thing that, oh yeah, I'll sell my house and I'll move into an apartment. So I think that market's going to get stronger.
Although for the most part, things have turned out well with Ciarma's property journey, he does have some regrets.
Look, the only way I could really answer that question is to say that my biggest regret is selling some of the properties that I have. You know, I've sold properties along the way, and I look back now and I know they've tripled in value, and I know at the time I probably could have held on to them, but I just thought, oh yeah, it's run its race, I'll sell it and move on. So my regret is actually selling and not holding. But, you know, I guess as time goes on, you sort of realise sometimes you need to retire some debt, free up some capital in order to move into something else, which was, you know, what I did, but I regret it.
When he initially got into property, he would take his partner on dates to auctions and open inspections in order to find an affordable investment.
Funny story, my wife likes hearing this story and she reminds me about it a lot. So when I was about 26, 1998, around about there, look, I always wanted to buy a property. I just started working and never really had much money. I read a book called Building Wealth Through Investment Property by Jan Summers. That was a life-changing book for me. I loved that book and I've still got it on my bookcase and always referred to it. And, you know, some of the things in that book were about, you know, buying multiple properties and sitting on them and, you know, watching them go up in value and then drawing against them and all of that. So I wanted to do that, but I just didn't have the money. And I was only sort of a couple of years into, you know, a lowly paid sort of graduate architect's job. Barely had money to sort of pay for the car and the rent every week. So I started going out, at that time I started going out with my now wife, Michelle, and I recall taking her out to, you know, auctions and open for inspections on weekends.
Sounds like very fun dates.
I just can't believe she put up with it, but she did, which was good. And anyway, eventually found a great little one-bedroom apartment in South Yarra. You know, brown brick building, Punt Road, noisy street. It was probably at the cheaper range of what I could afford. And I purchased it. And, you know, back then there were like any number of one-bedroom apartments around South Yarra, Paran, for between $90,000 and $100,000. And, you know, that was at the time when RAMS and Aussie Home Loans were lending 95% LVR on your mortgages. So I bought one, I found one, and it was $95,000. I needed $9,500 to complete the transaction. Right? Problem was I only had $4,000 in the bank. So I sheepishly asked Michelle, my girlfriend at the time, for a loan, and without question she lent me $2,000. And then I drew out cash from my credit card for the balance and scraped it all together and got the $9,500 and settled the property. Problem I had was I was getting paid on a monthly basis and I had 3 weeks to go before my next paycheck. So I had to go and get a personal loan for $5,000. Back then, I don't know if they do it now, but back then they processed those loans pretty quickly. Got a $5,000 loan, paid back Michelle within 2 to 3 weeks, and lived off the rest until, you know, from paycheck to paycheck, and slowly paid off my loan and the credit card. So that's how I got into property.
From there, Ciarma's buy and sell strategy continued as he sold that apartment and moved on to purchase another where he would live.
The good thing back then was those apartments were returning 7% yield and interest rates were 7%. So, you know, it was cash flow neutral. I rented it out for a year. And then got on top of things a bit more financially and was able to move in. And I spent about $5,000 on, you know, I laid floorboards myself and Michelle and I painted the walls. And a couple of years after that, we needed to sell. As I mentioned before, you know, we moved on to bigger apartments and bought a little house and needed to sell. And, you know, probably 2 to 3 years later, I sold for $178,000. So, you know, I made $70,000 clear, and that was an amazing feeling to sort of turn over a property and end up with 70,000 in the bank. So that's that sort of left a big impact on me, and thought, I want more of this. I want to keep doing this. So it's been stepping stones along the way. So I did that, and not long after I bought my property, Michelle bought a 2-bedroom apartment in Paran, which we lived in when we got married. She paid 150 for that, and when we sold it, about 4 years later for 350. We sold as we went in order to cash up to buy, our modest first home. So it was stepping stones along the way. And I look back now and go, oh, geez, if I had held those properties, they'd be worth a lot more. But at the time, you feel as if, you don't want to sort of take on too much debt, and you feel like you need to sort of free it up and sort of convert it into different properties as you go.
A life-changing aha moment for Ciarma occurred while at university, when he discovered the economics behind property.
There was one moment which I can recall, which is more about property development. When I was at uni in my architecture course, we were in a class called feasibility studies, and it was at the time when I really just sort of loved design, the built form, architecture. Didn't really sort of know at that point in time that I wanted to, be a developer as such. It was more about being an architect. And the lecturer put on the board a feasibility where, he explained to us how you can calculate the gross floor area of a building, and apply a building rate against that, and then you work out an efficiency, and then you apply a sales rate against the sales net sellable area, and then you build up a feasibility, and you work out a profit. Right? And that was an aha moment for me, because what that taught me was how to monetize my love for the built form. All right, so it was the economics behind property. So that was the moment, I think, was the crossroads where I knew, I get it now. This is how you make money out of property. Because prior to that, it was all about how do you create a beautiful building? What do human beings want? What amenity do they need? The built environment, the built form, all about that. And then all of a sudden was like, this is the economics behind it.
Inspired by Ciarma's story and his property aha moment, we'll keep the conversation going in a future episode on Property Investory. We'll talk about how to apply his strategy.
There's no get-rich-quick schemes. There's no, magic bullet, so to speak. It's hard work.
Habits which have contributed to his success.
Training myself to have to know every element of the process, so that nothing comes undone. I would sort of say my biggest trait is that I'm relentless.
And that's next time on a future episode of Property Investory. Also, if you haven't subscribed to receive your free property case studies that I only send out exclusively via email, you can text me your email address to 04 99 88 10 40 to subscribe. These real case studies are from experienced property investors where they share specific numbers of their portfolio, the strategies, and much more. Simply text me your email address to 04 99 88 10 40 to get your free case studies. Thanks for listening.